My wife's animal hoarding destroyed our marriage and nearly cost me my children. The nightmare that finally drove me to call Child Protective Services. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the deafening sound of roosters crowing nonstop in our sunroom, just 10 feet from our bedroom. As I stumbled toward the basement, the only sanctuary left in my house, flies swarmed around me in thick clouds. I'd given up swatting them because there were simply too many to count. This was my reality living with Jessica, my wife of 12 years, whose animal hoarding had transformed our suburban home into a nightmare that would eventually tear our family apart. The basement was the one place I'd managed to keep animal-free, but even there I could hear the chaos above. Male quail cackled incessantly from our living room, housed in makeshift cages stacked with budgerigars and cockatiels. The sound mixed with rabbits thumping across our floors and the scraping of their claws on laminate as they scattered droppings throughout our main level. My 4 children kicked these pellets around like confetti as they walked to school each morning. I'd learned to put on slippers before getting out of bed, hoping to avoid stepping in fresh dog urine or feces that saturated our bedroom carpet. The smaller dog had stopped responding to commands entirely, just staring blankly when told to go outside. When he did venture into our backyard, he'd immediately return to relieve himself in one of our bedrooms, where the waste would remain for days, because Jessica saw nothing wrong with this arrangement. Yesterday, Jessica brought home another tortoise and a frog for our daughter. The tortoise would join our bearded dragon in an overcrowded aquarium, though the dragon was often allowed to roam freely through the house, leaving droppings on furniture and floors wherever it pleased. This was Jessica's idea of giving it a happier life. Our living areas housed dozens of chickens in fabric pop-up enclosures, filled with pine shavings soaked in waste. The stench was so overwhelming it made my eyes water, and the mess had permanently damaged our oak hardwood floors. The smell penetrated every corner of our home, mixing with the odor from bird cages in our master bedroom, where exotic birds sang loudly all day and scattered seeds across the floor. The birds weren't confined to their cages either. Jessica believed in letting them fly free, which meant our bedroom walls were streaked with droppings, our pillows were stained, and our shower curtains were covered in bird waste. The bathroom mirror reflected not our faces, but the evidence of creatures perched there throughout the day. Our sunroom had become the epicenter of the horror, home to over 30 chickens, including 8 or 10 roosters that crowed around the clock. This was where the flies bred, streaming through a 40-year-old sliding door that separated this chaos from our kitchen and living areas. The heat and humidity turned the floor into a baking sheet of waste that sent waves of stench throughout our home. We owned pet rats in poorly maintained cages that reeked constantly. Our boys' room featured a snake and an axolotl aquarium, while one daughter had an algae-covered fish tank that we only refilled when the filter screeched from low water levels. Her hamster lived in a neglected cage, rarely receiving attention or proper care. As I sat in my basement refuge, I could hear mice chewing through the foam insulation in my walls. With endless access to animal feed scattered throughout the house, they were breeding faster than I could exterminate them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was trying to get rid of vermin while living in conditions that actively encouraged their proliferation. Jessica had ADHD and what I now recognize as severe hoarding disorder. Our backyard resembled a graveyard of abandoned projects, broken quail cages from the previous year when she'd raised over 150 birds, mounds of rotting wood chips, and garbage bags filled with 30 to 40 pounds of chicken waste that had deteriorated in the sun until they burst when touched. When I tried to address these conditions, Jessica seemed to delight in my frustration. She was unhappy in our marriage, and each new animal acquisition brought her a small hit of dopamine that temporarily masked her deeper problems. Our children had been conditioned to see this chaos as normal, often criticizing me for not embracing their mother's love of animals. The breaking point came when I threatened to rehome the chickens living inside our house. Jessica became explosively angry, hurling insults and claiming I was being unreasonable. She eventually moved the birds, but only after a vicious fight that traumatized our children. Within weeks, she was back to the same behaviors, bringing home more animals as if nothing had happened. Company would visit our home occasionally, and I lived in constant terror that someone would report us to Child Protective Services. Reading online forums about animal hoarding, I began to realize just how severe our situation had become. We weren't pet owners. We were living in conditions that constituted both animal abuse and child endangerment. After finding the courage to seek therapy, I started setting firm boundaries and beginning the monumental task of cleaning up literally 2 tons of chicken waste, sand, and pine shavings while addressing our rodent infestation. But my efforts came too late to save our marriage. A third party had already contacted CPS, and although the investigation was quickly closed after I'd cleaned up most of the mess, the damage to our relationship was irreparable. Jessica continued to deny that there had ever been a problem, developing deep resentment toward me for betraying her. Her therapist seemed to enable her delusions rather than addressing the underlying hoarding disorder, making Jessica more convinced that I was the problem rather than encouraging her to look inward. 12 months later, Jessica requested a divorce. The separation was a relief. I moved into a clean, organized home and secured 50-50 custody of our children. My physical and mental health improved dramatically almost immediately. For the first time in years, My kids had a sanctuary where they could breathe freely and walk barefoot without fear. But my hopes that Jessica would maintain reasonable standards were quickly shattered. Within months of our separation, she'd begun accumulating animals again. The house once more reeked of urine, mice had returned, and my children were coming to my home with belongings that stank so badly they made my entire house smell. My oldest child reported that the mice were back, and I noticed 2 of my kids wearing the same clothes day and night for multiple days. When I called CPS on my attorney's advice, I felt like I was betraying my children's mother, even though I knew their health was at risk. This wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. The investigation revealed the extent of the problem when my middle schooler voluntarily described the unsanitary conditions in great detail to the CPS worker. He told them how his mother refused to buy him a $10 shirt, claiming she had no money, then came home days later with dozens of new chickens and animal supplies. The pain in his voice when he recounted this story broke my heart. My son corroborated every concern I'd raised, describing conditions that no child should have to endure. The investigation resulted in court-ordered guidelines regarding pet quantities and cleanliness standards written into our custody agreement. Neighbors began filing complaints about barking dogs and escaped chickens in our suburban neighborhood that wasn't zoned for farm animals. 3 years later, I don't regret calling the authorities. If anything, I'm frustrated that Jessica's mental health issues forced me to choose between preserving our co-parenting relationship and protecting our children's well-being. The visits from CPS and animal control have resulted in improvements, though I worry this will become a recurring cycle. Jessica remains a loving and attentive mother when animals aren't involved, but her hoarding disorder creates an environment where our children go to school smelling like urine, wear dirty clothes for days, and consider rodent infestations normal. They don't recognize that their mother can't adequately care for dozens of animals, that their peers notice the smell, or that their living conditions pose health risks. Living with an animal hoarder isn't about being a pet person or not. It's about watching someone you love create dangerous, unsanitary conditions while being unable to recognize the harm they're causing. It's about children who think chaos is normal because they've never known anything else. It's about making impossible choices between family harmony and child safety. My basement refuge may be gone, but I've gained something more valuable. A clean home where my children can be healthy, and the knowledge that sometimes protecting the people you love means accepting that they'll see you as the villain. The roosters no longer wake me at dawn, and my children finally understand what it means to live in a home that doesn't make their clothes smell like a barnyard. The hardest part isn't the divorce or the custody battles. It's knowing that mental illness can make good people create harmful environments while believing they're showing love. Jessica genuinely thought she was giving our children wonderful experiences with animals, never recognizing that she was actually teaching them that neglect and unsanitary conditions were acceptable. But our children are resilient, and they're learning that homes can be clean, organized, and peaceful. That's a lesson worth fighting for, even when it costs you everything else.